all innovation is created at the edges, not in the center of the existing structures. So it's a great thing. But when it becomes a tool to fix the problems of my generation's big building leadership, you're in trouble because you are now relying on a model to fix a heart issue. And so then you wind up with burned out church planters, divorced families, all kinds of emotional, mental stresses. And there's nothing wrong. I've got my own emotional issues of anxiety, but it gets compounded by this extraordinary belief that this is the model that'll make it happen Jesus's way. Let's go do it. And, screw those people who did all that stuff before. We're going to do it right. No, nobody. That's not how it works.
Welcome to the Simply Strategic Ministry Podcast, where our goal is to help you grow your ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. My name's Landon. I'm the CEO of SSM. And man, I am so ready for you to hear from today's guest. As you know, we really believe in coaching, and we believe that you need not just maybe one type of coach, but we think you need lots of coaches, a tribe of mentors maybe in your life. And so today, I am really glad that you're going to hear from my coach. My coach's name is Rick Dunn. Rick was the lead pastor of Fellowship Church here in Knoxville, and I have so much love for the church that he led for 22 years. He has now transitioned out of his role and is just doing coaching for leaders like us and teams both in the business world and in the ministry and nonprofit space. Rick's tagline, he's going to tell you about it, is he is a strength and conditioning coach for the heart of a leader. Now, we talk a lot about the externals, the practical systems at SSM, okay? And I believe in those things. But here's what we know. If the Spirit's not in it and the heart hasn't been deeply formed by Jesus, then those systems and strategies are just loud, clanging gongs. They are not making a difference. And so today, I want to peel back the layers of a lot of the things that I personally have been being coached on in this season of planting a church, and let you hear about what it looks like to develop your heart first and some of the practical things you should be thinking about, which is ultimately self-leadership systems, so that your ministry can be sustained. This podcast is going to be great for whether you're a senior leader or whether you're a youth pastor who is trying to figure it out in a really healthy church, or you're trying to survive an unhealthy church. Rick is a coach for in the marketplace and for teams around more of the strategic things through re-leadership. And he is also starting a new nonprofit called White Horse Leadership. And he would love, if you are looking for coaching around your heart and strengthening and conditioning your heart as a leader, I would highly recommend you reaching out to Rick. He's going to give you his call to action, but it's Rick at whitehorseleadershipinitiative.com. Well, Rick, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, man. I'm so grateful and honored that you took time to be with me today.
It's easy. And hope you've experienced anytime you said, hey, let's talk, I'm on board with you.
Absolutely. You have been, man, as I said in the introduction, you have really helped me in so many ways, in ways that I didn't even know I needed help. And so I am really honored to really introduce you to a lot of my friends for the first time, who I care a lot about, and our leadership community here. And man, I look forward to them getting to listen to your voice even more as you kind of do some of the initiatives that you have on your heart right now.
Sure.
And but Rick, so give us just a quick little background. You're doing something new now, but tell us where you have been for the last 22 years or so.
Yeah, I'll back up a little before that. I was a college and seminary professor for a little over a decade, working primarily with youth ministry students, equipping, training, and a youth ministry degree, both at the college and education ministry seminary. Then to Knoxville, Tennessee, 5 years on a church staff. Then became the interim lead pastor Uh, kept looking around the room to see who was coming. Wound up being the lead pastor for 22 years, which I retired from in April of 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Rick, he was the lead pastor of the church that really is kind of the founding church behind the Koinonia Network, which is the network that local church, which I lead, is a part of. And so when I made the decision to join that network, it was really largely in part of the culture that Rick had been a part of building at Fellowship Church. And Fellowship Church, just to give you a quick little background, they're in the Knoxville area, and one of the largest, most influential churches in East Tennessee, and is doing some fantastic things. And I got to watch him make the lead pastor transition,
Yeah.
which was like a
Yes.
class
A lot.
that you cannot get in seminary. You cannot pay to get to watch and talk to the guy who, it was wild, like watching his church transition to another guy on staff who became the lead pastor. And each week as they're transitioning, the church just begins to keep growing, which never happens.
Yeah, it's a wonderful group of people, Landon, and it was a team effort from the elder board to myself to the staff to the congregation to really keep focused on growing the mission, not focused on who was
Yeah.
had the title of lead pastor.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really cool thing to watch. So tell us what are you doing now?
Yes, so I have two things. I have a for-profit business called Releadership, where I work with leaders in transition. So we say we want to leverage transition for transformation. That's consulting, coaching, variety of things. And I'm like very new, like this week new of the nonprofit White Horse Leadership Initiative being established. And that's for the development of forming and reforming leaders for what I hope will be, after I'm long gone, a generation of leaders who will reform leadership. I mean, in a reformation way
Yeah.
in the church and among those who follow Jesus in the Western culture in the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, I want to talk a lot about that today.
Sure.
One of the, you talk about a leadership reformation, and you focus so much on the heart of a leader. And
Yes.
actually, your little tagline that you have, we're going to need to like brand this on everything at some point, where you say you're the strength, and how do you say I'm the strength and something?
I'm a strength and conditioning coach for the heart of spiritual leaders.
Okay, so I just absolutely love that little bio line there. But the strength. So you talk about, okay, what do you think when it comes to like a leadership reformation? Because a lot of our audience are somewhere between 25 and 35, that younger leader who's really kind of out of college, out of the residency stage, is really building for the first time. And a lot of us are looking around, including me, are looking around and thinking, like, we've watched a lot of failures. And in fact, I have to bring it right over here. I know this is bad for the microphone and all, but I got right here. You got the old Elephant Room DVD set, which is when I came up through the ranks. That was like, oh, everybody was watching this. Well, most of those guys had some sort of significant, failure or moral failure of some sort. And so honestly, we're kind of left right now in the wreckage, as my generation of leaders are left in the wreckage of looking around and thinking, like, who do we look to? Like, we've talked, you and I have talked a lot about spiritual fathers. So what do you feel like it's going to take for a leadership reformation in our culture, our church culture?
Let me name the reality the way I see it. So I want you to imagine a bridge, like a suspension bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And a suspension bridge, kind of goes, the cables go up and they dip. And at certain points, you have weight bearing, like post or weight bearing parts that hold up the bridge. So if you can imagine, the weight bearing of spiritual leadership falls on the heart of the leader. 100%, there is nowhere else that it's going to fall. So my generation spent enormous resources on making bigger, wider, longer, more elegant bridges, and did not spend time working on the support under it. So, Landon, if you take a bridge that has a big enough heart when it starts at 25 and 32, and it has a big enough heart to hold the bridge, you keep widening the bridge, lengthening the bridge, expanding the bridge, and you get more weight and more traffic on it, and you don't do anything with the hearts, what's going to happen? Crush. So the only way that the Reformation happens is if we completely reverse the flow of what we're doing and say, let's build the heart, let God build the outcome. Sure, there's some good strategic ways of leading. You're very gifted at that. I love that about you. When it comes from a full heart, when it comes from a heart that's is being ignored or being neglected, it's guaranteed. The more talented you are as a leader, the worse the wreck's going to be, and the worse the implosion is going to be. So that's what you're looking at. So we're going to have to begin with strengthening hearts. And there's a passage in I think Psalm 119:32.
Okay.
I will follow the ways of your commands when you enlarge my heart. And that's what I want to see us happen, is the enlarging of the heart of the leader in relationship to God the Father, the leader's self, and the people they're leading.
Yeah, enlarging that. Yeah, that's really good. And so much of our coaching, as you coach me, is just around that idea of how do we just keep being vulnerable before God to let Him do the work in our hearts. And was that something that, because you kind of, as your leadership genesis, if you will, was kind of in the Bill Hybels era of church kind of explosion, and that, everything was really building really big for the first time.
Sure. Very big. Yeah.
And so, obviously your ethos, the journey that the Lord's had you on, is kind of different than just building bigger bridges, but building your heart. Was that something that always came natural to you? Was that something that was really modeled around you? How did the Lord bring you to that place?
It certainly wasn't modeled around me. I went into college done with the church completely. I thought, this is just doesn't make no. This is just I'm not doing this. It hadn't been for Scripture convincing me it was Jesus's plan to build His church. I was out. It's ironic. I was a college and seminary professor in the 90s in Chicago area.
Okay. Yeah.
Late 80s and 90s. So I lived with my students, worked with. I had relationships with people of staff at Willow Creek. I learned from Bill Hybels a passion for lost people and the call to be creative in the church. I want to really give due to that.
Yeah.
But when they evaluated my students in my classes who were like doing practicums and interns with them, this is about approximate numbers. There were 27 items they evaluated them on performance. I think there were 11 items they evaluated them on attitude. 1 about their spiritual journey. So what are you going to get, Landon? What leaders, you lead by creating a culture, then it's what you celebrate and what you tolerate. So if you will celebrate competency and results and external leadership outcomes all the time, and you will tolerate a very little, if any, attention to the soul and the heart of the leader, you're going to get those results every time. And I'm not throwing Willow under the bus or Bill Hybels under the bus. I'm not questioning motives. I'm not doing anything. I'm just saying it was the era of leadership we were in to find a way to be what you might consider the alpha male, primarily leader. There's not, there weren't some women involved. There weren't some people who had different gifts, but primarily the model is alpha male, dominant leader. And there's nothing wrong with being an alpha male, but it's really dangerous if your first step isn't surrender.
Yeah. Yeah. And my, my generation of leader was the progeny of that. And I think it all started to kind of crumble in a lot of ways. Like people kind of got to see that the heart wasn't big enough. And so, we talk a lot about, at SSM and our coaching company, we talk a lot about the simple strategic systems that we build so that we can grow our hearts, so we can grow our ministries and steward what God has entrusted us with. So, you've had youth ministry experience, you've been in the education world, you've been in small church and mega church world. What do you see are, okay, so like going that more like a granular type practical level, what are you seeing are some pitfalls from churches and guys that you coach where it's almost like this is being proliferated Like we're not learning
Yeah.
from our mistakes. What are some of those more
Yeah.
practical things that we're doing?
Well, for instance, let's pick on church planters since you are
Yeah,
one.
absolutely.
And me,
Pick
who
on.
was the visionary catalyst behind the network you're a part of. Uh, Church planting is an extraordinary tool for reaching local communities,
Mhm.
hence local church, right? It's an extraordinary tool for embedding the gospel in deep relationships and pioneering and creating at the edges, because that's where the all innovation is created at the edges, not in the center of the existing structures. So it's a great thing. But when it becomes a tool to fix the problems of my generation's big building leadership, you're in trouble, because you are now relying on a model to fix a heart issue. And so then you wind up with burned out church planters, divorced families, uh,
Mhm.
all kinds of emotional, mental stresses. And there's nothing wrong. I've got my own emotional issues of anxiety, but it gets compounded by this extraordinary belief that this is the model that'll make it happen Jesus's way. Let's go do it, and screw those people who did all that stuff before. We're going to do it right.
Yeah.
No, nobody. That's not how it works. It
Yeah.
works when you go and you're vulnerable before the Father, and you say to Jesus, "Hey, I'm just here to be filled up so I can overflow. I
Yeah.
really want to overflow." I just texted my wife this morning, Landon. I'm building this not in
Mhm.
Knoxville and Denver and some other places, particularly in Denver, and we got to make some decisions about how invested we get in the Denver area.
Mhm.
And I just said to her, I got a quote from C.S. Lewis about it's never too old to have a new dream. And
Mhm.
I just said, as we're dreaming our dreams, Teresa, I need you to know that I have no dreams that don't include you right beside me and with me and me present with you. There is
Mm.
nothing I'm trying to accomplish that I want to disconnect from God, myself, and you to get done.
Yeah.
And that's what happens, Landon. You get disconnected from God, yourself, and the people close to you, especially your spouse, to get things done. And there's no good fruit in that at all.
Yeah. That I really like what you were talking about, how we substituted a model instead
Oh, yeah.
of, because I think it's not even just we see this in big church plant, student ministry. It's like we
Absolutely.
ride the pendulum where we think, oh, we don't want to be one of those narcissistic Southern evangelical mega churches, but
Hey,
and
hey, right.
then
Easy there.
uh,
Go ahead.
we don't want to be like that, and so we're going to be the house church movement, or we're going to be the micro church movement, or whatever, whatever the buzzword is, emergent, or
That's right. That's
and
right.
then the same goes with like student ministry. One thing I see right now is, so there's, there are a lot of student pastors out there, specifically a lot of the people I know are kind of from this Baptist world of this kind of was a lot of growth, evangelistic events, invest and invite
Right.
events,
Right. Right. Right.
and man, the Lord's done so many things through that. But then it was like, okay, what about spiritual formation? And so all the guys who are my age and younger are like, you know, reading John Mark Comer and trying to go down like
Yeah.
those paths of that
Yeah.
more contemplative spiritual formation pathways. And here's the thing: it's like, if you don't fix the heart, it's not really changing anything, because it's not like only big churches have narcissists. It's
No. No.
small
No.
churches have them as well. I
Yeah.
always make fun of the people who are like, oh, the celebrity pastor, but then you look at their church and everything is centralized around them. And a lot of student pastors
Sure.
are celebrity pastors of their high schools in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, where they've
Yeah.
made it all
Oh no.
about.
I I can be easily seduced by that.
Uh,
I had this theory, Landon, that one day I would become really mature spiritually and my flesh would just love Jesus.
uh-huh.
And actually, my flesh does not love Jesus.
Mm,
The Spirit of God awakening my soul, I love my Savior.
yeah.
My flesh is still like, actually, I've said before, I've been auditioning for the role of God for 63 years. And he does not seem to be willing to give it to me, but I keep trying. And that's what we try to be God of these things. Because don't you want to believe there's some external thing you can do that will fix all of this? And that
Hmm.
the answer isn't, I really need a Savior. today
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
tomorrow and the day after that. So I think you're hitting on something really important. You just the methodology, the models.
Mhm.
I used to teach theology in seminary, and I would teach it this way. The first year students, I say, here's what you're going. You came to seminary to get your arms around theology, and I want you to keep doing that. And by your second year, you'll have your hands will start to be full. And by your third year of seminary, your arms will be so tired, you'll just
Mhm.
drop them to your side. And when you drop them to your side, your father will hug you and hold you. You'll collapse into his arms. Now you're ready to study theology.
Yeah. That's
That's where
that's
theology comes from. It comes from the heartbeat of the father, not from the book.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm all for books and I've got a PhD. I'm all for it, but it's got to
Mhm.
be from the heart of the father.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, some of the models that we've used some of the models that we use of even what it looks like to be a competent leader for a ministry setting
Mm-hmm.
have not been really they don't find their genesis in the scriptures per se. There's that passage in Acts where it says, appoint faithful and able men, and a lot of times we're looking just for able guys who
Sure.
really gone through haven't really been formed deeply. And so I would just say, okay, so you're thinking back. I mean, you're thinking the right way, but you're thinking backwards in especially a lot of people who are hiring youth pastors for the first time. A lot of youth pastors, they're mid 20s, early 20s. I started when I was 20 years old. And man, I think back and I'm like, who let me do that? But like, what are some of the things that you're looking for that are not the typical markers of just somebody who works in this kind of evangelical
Yeah.
industrial complex, if you will,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
who really's
Yeah.
got that heart that's going to be able to withstand the weight? What are you looking for?
That's a great question. Um, Psalm 139, 23 and 24 says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there's any grievous way within me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. That is the number one competency I want in a ministry leader, that they have submitted themselves to the searching work of the Spirit. And the
Mhm.
phrase that I use is they have a compassionate, courageous curiosity to know what lies underneath,
Okay, tell
that
me
they're
more
not
about that.
ignoring it. Yeah. So all of us are driven by unconscious things that need redemption. And the farther we grow in life, the more those things begin to show up in our marriage, our parenting, our leadership. And if you don't pay attention to those things, they become the driving force. I don't care how much perfume you put on it with theology and the latest leadership book and the latest model of Christian spirituality, it's the same thing. It is for
Mhm.
me. And so I want from the very beginning, do you know how to sit with the Spirit of God and a godly mentor or a godly friend or a godly community and allow yourself to be exposed for where you still need Jesus today? Are you
Mhm.
just are you just willing to have Susan Scott, who's not a believer, says the conversation is the relationship. I look, Landon,
Mhm.
to see what kind of conversations are you having.
Hmm.
Are they conversations about how to make your ministry bigger? Conversations about how to get that's so I don't have a problem with that. I'm all about
Yeah.
strategy. I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. But your first conversation is what's really going on in here? What's really stirring in me? And so I look, first of all, do you even want to do that? Because if you don't want to do that, it's because you are either misunderstand grace or you don't want to hear the truth or both. And compassion is a sign of grace, and courage is a sign of wanting to hear the truth. So I'm looking,
Mm.
do you have a curiosity about yourself, your relationships, and the people you lead that is compassionate, Jesus' grace, courageous, show me what's real, what's true. I won't run away from it, but always curious because there's something more. Because we're not, and you've heard me say this over and over again. I am 63 years old. I've spent 18, 19, I guess 19 is a fair time, 44 years in a ministry leadership context.
Mhm.
Uh, I have always been inclined to want to build a human success story in my ministry. And God is committed to a divine redemption story. And
Mm.
he's really not engaged in this. If it's human success story, it fulfills, helps the purpose. That's the kingdom. That's fine, but that's not what he's engaged
Yeah.
in. Is that person engaged in their redemption story? Can they see
Yeah.
that? Because if they don't, they won't do it with other people. and they'll eventually, their gifts, their competencies will become what they lead with rather than that connection to the Spirit.
Yeah, yeah. I'm reading through right now a book called The Critical Journey, Janet Heiberg,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
it talks about spiritual development, not necessarily in like a linear path, but it talks about the idea of you have this productive life, and then you do what's called the journey inward, and then you hit the wall, and God's going to kind of pull you through that wall. So I think the wall that I was hitting up against until about probably 2020 ish, I think COVID brought a lot out of me in a lot of good ways. But I think for me, I would ask the questions a lot of times, like the compassionate, courageous,
Courageous
curious questions.
curiosity. Yeah.
But I think a lot of times I was asking them not because I wanted to have my heart deepened or become like Jesus, but because I kept hitting ministry roadblocks. So, for example, it's kind of the Maxwell law of the lid. I would think, okay, well, if I want to grow my ministry, so I need to bust through this lid that I'm in, as opposed to
Yes.
I want to be like Jesus. And because I want to be like Jesus, I also want to, build his church alongside of him. And I think even young leaders right now who are hearing this, they're looking for different soul care strategies and things like that. Not because they genuinely want to be with him and become like him, but might be because they're tired of, blowing up on their volunteers.
Yeah.
And
sure.
I'd rather them be doing that work than not at all. But at the same time, I almost think that I kind of got it backwards. And I don't really know, I don't really know what it took to get that in the right order, except just the Lord doing the work.
Well, it's the human process. And so you're going to do that again. You'll hit another wall, and then you'll hit another wall. It's part of how we grow. It's what you do when you hit that wall. I mean, it's really key. And so the two biggest issues I run into with young leaders is one, they think they're supposed to always know what to do, and they think they're supposed to be able to do it by themselves. But I'm supposed to know what to do. I'm the leader, and I'm supposed to be able to do it by myself, which is completely opposite of leadership reality. Leadership is Robert Quinn calls it walking naked into the land of uncertainty. That's leadership. You're not leading if you know what to do. You're leading when you don't know what to do. That's leadership. That's finding your way. Quinn wrote a book called Building the Bridge While You Walk on It. That's leadership.
Yeah.
You cannot learn that alone. You don't, man. Nobody's listening to me who's going to get this alone. I've told you I was a feral leader. I didn't have a mentor on how to lead. I had a few examples I was pulling from. I was making that stuff up as I went. And that's why I do Whitehorse, is because I know what happens when you do this alone. And I know I live downstream from the most of the people listening to this podcast. I know what happens if you put the pressure on yourself to always know what to do and always try to do it alone. You weren't made to live alone. You weren't made to learn alone. And you certainly weren't made to become mature alone. And I think the switch is that my maturity is going to be my greatest resource, not my skill.
Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? Maturity comes from dealing with the wounds and the work. It doesn't come from climbing the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, what are the questions, I'm just thinking to our listeners here, like, what are you asking the right type of questions about yourself? And are you being vulnerable and going to the place with the Father to be able to have those answered by him? Because it just blows my mind. I think that one of the worst definitions for spending time with Jesus is quiet time, because that just sounds so boring. It's like we get to hear the voice of the Father and let him tell, hey, you're good enough. Like, hey, you're accepted, you're loved. And but one thing I have really fought on this leadership journey, specifically now in my new, outside of just being within an organization, but starting an organization, starting a church, is I am just blown away by the amount of time that it takes, like the amount of physical hours that have to be on the calendar in order for me to number one, have time with guys like you and some of the other coaches in my life. Number two, time to pray and be with Jesus. And number 3, time to actually process what I'm going through and be able to ask myself those questions. So I think there's a little bit of a tension right now. There's a tension in the younger leadership world where, there was kind of like the leaders above us kind of grew up in the Jack Welch era of you eliminate the top.
That's a great reference. Yes.
That in the Jack Welch era, and who basically, was the world's best CEO of the time, and was known for cutting the bottom 10% every year, and it was survive and advance. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so, then we kind of go into this area to where, anxiety, our anxiety has been exploited by, algorithms and media, and we are just in an anxious culture post-COVID that is exponentially accelerated in people's lives. And so there's kind of this draw now to this more of these formation circles that's all about soul care, soul health. And so you kind of get these younger leaders now who don't know how to work hard either now. So you kind of get the pendulum swing. So one of the things I've really valued about you is you've led at an extremely high level with a church that does so much like volume of ministry. It's not like you're, living in the desert. And it's not like you're just this, contemplative guy who, never approaches a boardroom, is always in the prayer room. Okay, so how do we develop a strong work ethic with high dexterity and being able to withstand and be able to move forward, but also actually spend the time that it takes to do the work in an environment for most of us that's extremely unhealthy, that hasn't had leaders who've done the work? Help me navigate. Think how you're talking to a student pastor who's working in a very unhealthy work environment with a senior leader who maybe really values getting things done, and they're trying to take the next steps in that type of culture. What are some of the things you might be coaching that guy to think through? Because he can't change the organization.
No, it's a great question. It's great. No, you want to exhaust yourself, try to change the person who's leading it. That's just like, that's not going to work.
Okay, let's just stop there for a moment. We'll come back to what we said. I have this conversation so often where guys who are young in the organization, they're energetic, they're passionate, they say, I think I can change the culture here. Is that just, are people spinning their wheels, or should they just be focusing on changing the culture?
What would you say to someone who says, I don't really like who she is right now, but I know once we get married, I'm going to change her.
Sounds like a tough marriage.
I don't really respect him, but I bet after we're married, I will.
Yeah.
It is what it is. All right. So you have to ask yourself the question, why am I in this culture, and what does my redemptive presence look like? I don't have a redemptive purpose for the people above me. I have a redemptive purpose for all the people I'm leading, and I have a redemptive presence in the whole. That's all I got. Trying to think of the appropriate language. We'll use appropriate language. Dung to blessing ratio. When the role you're in has more dung than it has blessing, you'll get out. And if it has more blessing than dung, as long as it's not lacking integrity, you'll probably stay in. So I have a different way of saying that in other contexts, but you see what I'm saying. So that's that. Like, if you're there for a purpose, fulfill that purpose, lead, but don't spend a ton of your time trying to get the person above you to change, because God didn't ask you to do that. It's like when Saul's peeing on the wall, and men like, go get him. And, he slices something off his robe. So, man, I shouldn't even done that. That's God's anointed. So whether you like it or not, that's who God has to lead that church or organization you're in. And if you can't do it, then go find something else to do. There's all kinds of ways to work at Home Depot and love on people, or to work in an ice cream store and love on kids or fast food. I'm not trying to diminish the role of ministry. Obviously, I believe in it so strongly. It's what I invest my life in. But if you can't make peace with why you're there for the people you're serving, then you probably need to do something else.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That makes sense, Landon?
It does. One of my mentors who's been on this podcast before, Greg Gibson, he shared with me one time, he was like, talking about that, I think I can change the place. And it's like, listen, God didn't make you the elder of that church. You're not on the board. Like it's not your responsibility to change it. And then Ray Ortland on his podcast, which I highly recommend, the You're Not Crazy podcast for pastors, he just said your job, like first off, if you're going to try to do that, you're going to have to play the long game here. You're going to have to be able to be with Jesus for 10 to 15 years and just keep lifting up Christ. And
Redemptive
that's what
presence. That's
yeah.
right. Be redemptive presence, right?
And he said it was so. Go ahead.
Freeing. It's freeing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Frees you up.
So,
yeah.
So going back to my original question, okay?
Yeah.
How are we deeply forming, well, not deeply forming ourselves, how are we being deeply formed in the time that it takes while also being highly effective and being able to get things done well? And talk to me a little bit about some of the things, how to navigate that tension.
Sure. Well, I spent a decade in AAU basketball coaching and leading organization. And all my players, because they were trying to get college scholarships, players I was coaching. And so they would do speed, conditioning, strength training apart from the gym, which is wonderful. But the game of basketball, you have to play it to know it, right? So there's this interplay between, if I don't do the work outside the gym, I'm not bringing my whole self to the gym, my highest capacity. If I do the work outside, but I'm not focusing on the skills in the game. So it's really a both and this is where some of the compassion, you're just human, right? Some of the things that young leaders are doing, if they were to say, God, I don't know how to do all this, he would say, well, I didn't ask you to. Like, at what point did I ask you to do all this? This wasn't what I asked you to do. And so being very clear about what your calling is, what your vision and your why is, and being clear with your leaders. This is why we're doing. I think when you're younger, you want to be able to articulate your why to your leaders. We're doing it this way because of this. I want you to understand why. We've moved this, we've cut this, we're adding this. It's because here's why we're doing it for ministry effectiveness. If you have a leader who's like a high accountability, check in on your behaviors kind of a thing, then talk about which behaviors are the most important. Where do you want me to spend my most time? Where do you want me to give my most energy?
Yeah.
And try to be as respectful as you can to do that. But if you work 60 hours a week and you're not taking care of yourself, I promise you, the Father didn't ask you to do that. You say, well, my pastor did. Well, it's not good. Yeah. It's just not good. Yeah. So you have to find a way to negotiate your way out of that, or find a better way to be about the work. And, I probably worked 60 hours a week for decades. I get senior leadership in a large organization is a lot of work, but knowing when to let go of it, when to walk away from it, how to care for yourself, when to step away. When RD replaced me as lead pastor at Fellowship Church, a couple of things I said is move toward every problem. Do not move away, and get away once a month for 36 to 48 hours with your wife and have nothing to do with the place. That's what it's going to take if you're going to make it long-term here. You got to move towards all the problems, but you got to retreat towards the Father with your wife to build the capacity to stay in that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think young leaders, we don't know our capacity yet at all.
Right.
And God keeps expanding our capacity. And so like some people think that they're a 60-hour a week capacity because that's what's been modeled for them, but they're probably, closer to that standard 40. And even capacity in so many other ways. But, the one thing that our mutual friend Brad Ravy talks about is just embracing our noble limitations as well. And
so good.
And if we're constantly pushing past our limits, like we're not honoring God, we're not being faithful.
So I had a great opportunity. I did some work yesterday, and then I also spent time with my wife. I got up at 3:45 this morning. I'll be done at 9:30. I can pull that off. Tomorrow morning, there's nothing on the calendar.
Yeah.
Because I can't do 3 and 4 days in a row like that. But on this day, to accomplish what had to be done, and I get up at 4:30 so I can write in the silence and the darkness, because I love to do that. I'll build into the day a nap and make sure that I have the energy to be present with my wife and to connect with her and my grandchildren, my children. So it's a learned thing. And here's the thing. I hope I'm saying this well. you're just going to make a bunch of stupid mistakes. And that's
Mhm.
actually how we're going to grow through this. So if you're like, here's an old guy, can he tell me how to get it right? No, I cannot tell you how to get it right. I can tell you how to posture yourself. I can tell you what
Mhm.
people to put in your life. I can give you some practices, but you learn by making mistakes. You learn in the real world. Uh, when I was coaching basketball, most of the things I did at the end of my career was because of dumb things I did when I was early in my career. When I led Fellowship Church, 22 years, I hope I was a better leader than I was 22 years before. But at the end of the day, all I could do is bring myself you just bring yourself, Landon. You're going to reproduce yourself one way or another. And sometimes you're
Yeah.
going to reproduce really ugly things about yourself that you're going to have
Mhm.
to repent of. And the way you treat people, the things you say. I've got multiple things I did over those 22 years. Like I regret that. I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have done it that way. But if I don't have the compassion and the grace for myself to make those mistakes, I won't have it for anyone else.
So to develop that
Hmm.
compassionate, courageous curiosity, what were some of the things that you did in leadership to kind of foster that? What were some of the more, disciplines, practices,
In me
however you might say it?
personally,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, I married a truth sayer who's an Enneagram 8 and a therapist. So what am I going to do, Landon? Where am I going
yeah,
to go? I
yeah.
have nowhere to turn. It's coming at me. Um, she's going to tell me the truth, whether I like it or not, which has been a great gift.
Mhm.
Because of how stubborn I am, one of my greatest gifts was to have a wife who's so absolutely passionate about
Yeah.
living in reality. So that was really helpful.
Mhm.
My best friend's a couple in Chicago. There's nothing he can't say to me. And I think he got injured seriously. He's going to be okay, but it could have killed him recently. And so I flew up to Chicago and hung out with him one day or 3 days, and we just sat around and talked and cried a lot about
Mhm.
35 years of relationship and what it's like to be with someone who would actually listen to anything you said and accept you and tell you the truth because they love you. Just unbelievable. I've done therapy. I found a coach later in my life because I couldn't find a coach that I felt like understood what I was saying and talking about. I
Yeah.
wish I'd found one earlier. I don't know how much that's on me and just the reality of where I was. Um, and just staying grounded by having a life outside the church. Like if your whole life is the church, you have a very skewed view of life, and the church becomes your center. It's great. Give work. Obviously, I worked hard in the church, but I have friends that really don't care. They didn't care about Fellowship Church. They didn't care about my advancement of my career. They cared deeply about who I was. And so
Mhm.
when I had issues with parenting or marriage, those are the friends I went to, not my church.
Yeah.
So staying differentiated from your church,
Mhm.
it's not you. It's where it's the container for you to be a redemptive presence in Christ's kingdom. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's
That's
nothing,
good.
and it's wonderful. And it's gracious. It's sacred. I mean, it's like amazing to be entrusted with this. But at the end of the day, it's not you.
Yeah.
I always said, I've never saw myself as the lead pastor of Fellowship Church. I stewarded the role of lead pastor as Rick Dunn for a season period.
Mm, that's good. That's good. Some of the things that I think practically that as I've been walking this path with you is just trying to pay attention to
Hmm.
what makes me mad. Why am I so sad by this? Or, like I remember going out of leadership team meetings, like we would have our tactical meeting with our leadership team and we'd go out and I would like, why did that happen? Why are we still talking about this? Why is that still on the agenda? As opposed to asking, why did that frustrate me so much that it's still on
Yes,
the agenda?
yes,
And
a
I think
hundred
just
percent.
a practical thing, because I mean there's strategic decisions that probably could have been done differently, but I think that's where it's like we're not going to change the culture of the organization until we change our hearts.
A hundred
Um,
percent.
and and
But
and God hasn't asked us to change the culture of our organization, but He has asked us to do the vulnerable work with the Father and changing our hearts. And so one of the things, like, I just try to write down on my notes app all the time
absolutely,
of just like, I had a hard meeting with this church, or I had a hard meeting with this person, and this is what I felt. And it may take me 2 weeks to come back to that note. but I
Mm-hmm.
process through writing and teaching. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I'll write something around that. That might be a blog one day or might be an article, but
Yeah.
it forces me to think through it right now and actually process that. And for me,
100%,
those are
Landon.
some of the
Okay.
practices.
So the way things work is words create your world, your reality. Your reality is what it is, but your definition of reality is created by words. So processing it verbally in conversation, writing it down, praying, all of those things begin to form a reality for you about who you're going to become. So that is
Yeah.
just, it's brilliant. What you're saying is a brilliant strategy. It's very practical. It's very real, but you got to take time to do it. If you don't take time
Yeah.
to do it, you just move on to the next thing and you don't notice what's actually going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we don't, in general, we do not move as humans as fast as we are expected to. And yesterday,
That's a good word.
we brought on our first staff member at local church, and our first meeting was with one of our elders, and we took a walk together because our hearts usually, I think it's, I forget who said it, but it's the author of God Walks who says our hearts usually move at the pace of walking, and our ministry culture and our church culture wants us to move at the pace of flying, and it just doesn't create the right heart. So, man,
Yeah.
thank you so
This,
much.
yeah.
Yeah,
Let me
go
tell you,
ahead.
can I tell you just one more thing, Shaquille? This will
Absolutely.
illustrate your point. It may not encourage your young listeners or
Okay.
watchers. I came to Knoxville in 1997 to start a new way of developing leaders for ministry out of my dissertation I wrote for my PhD in the seminary I was teaching in. I became a lead pastor, which made it impossible for me to fulfill that vision that I believe had been planted in me. So I took the vision that had already been approved by the elders, I'd already worked on for years. I took it to a nearby Melton Hill Lake Park and I buried it.
Hmm.
Uh, and 26 years later, God gave it back to me.
Yeah.
And one elder said, I don't think you buried it. I think you planted it. There are things
Hmm.
planted in you, Landon. There are things planted in you that cannot come out now. Don't rush towards trying to get there. It took 26 years in Knoxville, Tennessee, for me to get to the place where the Lord would say, okay, now I release you to do what I called you here to do. That feels like the most inefficient thing in the world until you understand it's actually a redemption story. And I had
Yeah.
26 years of redemption story to live as a leader before I stepped into this role.
Yeah. That is so, man, that is so good that you did. And I think there's a lot of youth pastors who maybe they thought they were going to be, at this size of a church or this big of a
Oh yeah, we
ministry,
all do.
and it's just taking that and allowing that vision to die so that we can receive something so much better. And
If you've
man,
not achieved, if you've not achieved everything that you thought you would in ministry, go to God and say, thank you for loving me enough to spare me from that punishment.
so now my listeners get a little glimpse into what Rick and I talk about once a month for an hour or so,
Yeah.
because this is the path the Lord's had me on, and man, I'm really grateful that you've invited others to join us as we are all trying to pursue the Father. And man, I know there are maybe some teams that might be listening to this, or some folks, and I know you have a lot that's going to be coming out in the future about how to connect and the things that you're going to be offering. And so, is there any way right now, in the meantime, is there any way that to better connect with you if somebody is looking for coaching around the
Sure.
heart of a leader? What would be the best call to action?
Sure. Easiest thing to do. I don't have a website. I'm not doing anything because I'm creating resources before I get loaded here. But
Mm-hmm.
Rick at whitehorseli.org. It's Leadership Initiative. Rick at whitehorseli.org. And I'd be
Absolutely.
glad to interact with you, engage. And I set up like a free 30-minute consultation just to figure out if there's
Yeah.
something I can serve you with at this moment in your journey.
Yeah.
And if not, then I point you in a direction that'll be helpful.
Well, the moment that stuff is public, we definitely will be sharing that with our people. We at
Yeah.
SSM, we focus on more of the practical strategy systems for volunteers, planning, all of that stuff. But we know that the heart is behind all of that bridge, and
Yep. Yep. That's
and
right.
so we definitely want to connect our community with you. But thank you so much, Rick, for coming on the pod, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to share with our community when that does become more of a public venture. But thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate you hopping
Sure.
on the podcast.
Absolutely. And I'll say to your listeners, I say to people when they ask me about USC, is the real deal. I love you, Landon. I love the journey you're on. And none of our conversations happen if you don't bring your heart. So I appreciate you,
Mm-hmm.
man.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.